Welcome to Real Life Mentoring, where we explore real life issues to help you make an authentic difference in the world.
Hi, it's Chris and Christina, and we're really excited today. We have a real life example of a mentor-mentee relationship in David and Blaine. We're going to give some time for them to introduce them. Chris, anything you want to add right here at the very beginning?
Nothing other than I am excited to hear two men in the middle of a mentee relationship that's outside of me, because I hear it and I see it all the time. Mm-hmm. But to hear your story, guys, I'm looking forward to it.
So we're going to ask them to do two things. We're going to have them give their formal introduction, like who they are, any credentials, and then we're going to really get to know who they are. So David, we'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'll start current. So I'm David Achata, and I have a small leadership development company, and I do consulting and coaching in the corporate world, helping companies design leadership development programs, processes. And I'm an author. I have a few books out there. I am a husband of 22, coming up on 23 years to my wife, Amy, who's a therapist. And I joke with her, I don't like that word. It feels so permanent, you know. She's like, you should go work on that. So she's
Maybe
a counselor.
She can refer you to someone.
Yeah. I like the word counselor better, but it's really a therapist. And my kids, Anna and Isaac, are 19 and 15. We live in East Tennessee. Prior to my work in the corporate world, I worked as a pastor for about 10 years. And along the way, have also been involved with a number of different church plants, starting different churches. So between traveling for my corporate work and in the past, the pastoral work, very full life, very full schedule. Most of all, though, I just love talking about healthy relationships, healthy leadership. And along the way, I get to meet some awesome, people like you and like Blaine.
Great. Okay. Mr. Blaine, give us your formal introduction.
All right. I should warn you at the beginning, it's just not going to be as good as David's because he's so well-spoken.
He set the bar.
I never expected us to be kind of, a side-by-side comparison, but as the mentee, it's a little easier.
We didn't say comparison. We just
no comparison.
But we're thinking it now. Thanks.
I am a writer and podcaster predominantly, and in part homesteader here in central Colorado. For the past 10 years, I built a publishing platform for young men, had a magazine, and kind of a digital marketing wing. And I left that to pursue more writing, to start another teaching platform that was a little closer to what I was interested in talking about, which was the gospel of Jesus. That was only a few years ago now, so it was right at the beginning of that season that I met David. But I am a husband of 9 years. I have two kids who are 7 just recently and 3. And then I have a fluctuating amount of animals here on the property. Got some cows, some chickens, a horse, some cats, a dog. We think one of the cats has wandered off, maybe permanently again. So it really is it's a fluctuating number. And one of our chickens managed to hide some of the eggs and actually brood them and hatch them. And none of us knew it was happening, which, it takes quite a long time until about 6 weeks ago, I went to the barn and there was cheeping in the background. I thought, no way. Good job.
Surprise.
I wish you were more diversified.
Yeah, both of you.
Yeah.
Gosh, how boring. Okay, that was the formal. Here's the informal. Tell us something we would not know about you on a resume, like crunchy or smooth peanut butter, cheese, no cheese on your pizza. Let's talk about the real stuff.
That's right.
Who doesn't have cheese on a pizza?
Come on.
I'm going to tell you some things you might not know about David.
Oh, that's better.
When I visited David, the number of drop-ins just to say hi to people was pretty incredible. Mechanics were disproportionately well represented. So while getting from a river back to David's house, we stopped in on two different
That's
mechanics. One who was working on an old car that David was working on, and the other who just was a friend of David's who had a sweet truck in the shop that he just wanted to show David.
Yeah.
I also learned from being out there that sometimes on a weekend, David will go to Walmart and hang out in the produce section just to chat with people.
Oh
And,
my gosh.
and when
What
you
a
spend
weirdo.
time with
He
David,
should
you have
see a
to,
therapist.
That's
you have to
right.
budget in like a 30%, making friends with people time allotment, because wherever you go, David's going to start a conversation, be actually curious. When I asked David, man, how did you do this? And he said, there's no technique that I can teach you because the solution is greater love. And what you need to understand is that this is all really fun to me. Like,
That's
I'm
right.
really having a great time talking to all these people. And I know that I have good boundaries, so I'm not worried about their expectations. So yeah, it's just, it's so fun to stand in the checkout line at the Big R and befriend the cashier.
Mm.
Okay, David, top that.
So I didn't plan this, but I get to talk about things you might not know about Blaine. He already let the details out about the homesteading, but one thing, I will not reveal raw hard data, but I will go general speaking. Blaine is really amazing at trying to live on hardly any money.
Wow.
I've done that before, but not on purpose.
Well, we've had some really neat conversations about, survival mode with money. And when you get a little bit beyond survival mode and then even beyond that, and it was really impressive to me how Blaine at this phase of life has tried to really budget living simply on little means. And so I'm really impressed by that. Another interesting thing that you may not know about Blaine is that he intentionally tries to live in such a way that's off the grid to where he cannot be reached by just anybody. And his wife does the same thing. So his wife, Emily, does have a phone, but it lives in the glove box and rarely turns on.
Wow.
Of the car. And they don't live within cell phone service. They have an internet accessibility, but the wireless router gets turned off when it's not being used. So those are some admirable things, about Blaine and Emily. And you may not know this about Blaine either, but he is one of the most well-read people that I know. And so I think that he thinks I've read more books than I have, because he always asks me if I've read a certain person, and I'm like silent. I'm silent on the other end, so he believes that maybe I have, read it. I go, But Blaine has walked a really wild journey from academia to intentional quietness off the grid, where he cannot be reached by cell phone, and that's super impressive to me. And he's also part of a little tiny network of house churches where he helps lead one of those groups. And he and his family are committed to helping organize the chaos of being a part of families that have many, many children running around screaming in a home during a gathering of some sort. Anyway, they're just awesome. But I love how we've kind of stumbled into telling information about each other as opposed to about ourselves. So those are some crunchy peanut butter type details.
I love it.
No, that's evidence of some genuine conversations you've had.
Yeah.
And how observant you guys have been of one another. So I really appreciate that.
And why we wanted to highlight you guys after we spoke with David, he was like, I have this idea of, why don't we talk about this mentoring relationship I have with someone in my life? And so we're excited to have you guys sort of uncover what that process initially looked like. How did it get started? Then bump us up to where it is now. Chris, you want to jump in there?
I'll just simply say that with our work, It's about developing meaningful, intentional, authentic conversations or relationships. And that happens through ongoing conversations and connecting points. And so we just want to hear from you guys today. So one of you guys want to take it from there and say, tell us how it started and how did this come about, and tell us some details about what's happened in the middle of it.
High level, I met Blaine at a training I was doing. I was working with a nonprofit called Saturate, and this is years ago now. I don't know, 5 maybe. Blaine was in the training, and we had some good conversation. Got to rub shoulders with him off and on for a day or two. And then I ran into Blaine again years later, maybe 3 years later. He remembered a lot of details about me, and I remembered Blaine's face. I could not remember his name. I asked somebody real quick, hey, this guy's, I've been with him in this training. What's his name? And they reminded me of Blaine's name. And I just remember being really impressed that he remembered the details he remembered about my life. He was asking me details about my son, who I shared some stories about in the training, some details about people that I had talked about in the training as well, like what's their update, what's happened since then. And so on that particular trip, I was traveling with another mentor friend of mine. So you can see the relational dynamics sort of, they come back, to bless. I was traveling with someone who I was trying to learn from, and I ran into Blaine, who ended up saying, hey, I want to learn from you. But as we spent some time together on that trip, Blaine and I talked a bit more, and we ran into each other a little bit on that trip multiple times. And he called me and said, hey, what you're doing with Joe, who is the guy I was traveling with, would you be willing to do that with me? And so absolutely, my life is open. I clear time to spend time with guys. So if you can get here to be with me, we'll spend some days together. So Blaine came my direction, and that's been, I don't know, 2 years maybe. So that's my version of it.
Well, Blaine, let me ask you, what did you see that was happening between David and his mentor, and what were you desiring and needing?
Great question. Because I do like to tell people that, unfortunately, the pathway to great mentoring, discipling relationship is pain and weakness. And I was, nearing the end of my 20s, knucklehead in his 20s, it's pretty funny that I was even it was a training for church leaders that I got invited to, principally because there was no one to go as a wingman for one of the elders of our house church network. And Joe, who ended up befriending David, an older man, told that elder, well, he knew my name. Why don't you just bring Blaine with you? So I wind up in a room with a bunch of experienced pastors, and here's David. And if you spend any time with David, you will see right away that he lives with an incredible amount of joy and passion and excitement and peace. And it was his character. I was so attracted to a man about a decade ahead, but who plainly had vision. And the stories that he told were about ordinary life, but they were so beautiful. He told stories about challenging his dentist's receptionist to a banana pudding bake-off. And it was like a repent, for the kingdom of God has come among you day, as he rolls in before the office starts. It was funny though, because then I asked him, did you win or lose? He's actually, someone else asked. He says, I got creamed. Well, years later, I tasted David's banana pudding, and I went, there's no way you lost. What happened? And he explained, it was a cold day, and I served a cold pudding, and she served a hot pudding, and that's what happened.
That's right.
But there was something about just simply the joy, and then David would hit these really deep levels. He and I talked earlier today, and we were talking about really deep and difficult realities of life: death, losing people, navigating work, changing relationships. So here's this guy who is teaching about here's kind of how you lead in a coaching way, lead via inquiry. My hair's getting blown back, but then it's the substance, it's the character of David. So I kind of just fanboyed David for a couple of years. I'd go on his website and see what he was up to. And then I heard from the elder in our church who went to that training with me, guess who's coming out to Colorado Springs on the wings of Joe, David. I thought, no way, because also right before David left that training in Portland, we had prayed for his family outside this restaurant, and I really wanted to know what had happened, but I didn't know how to get a hold of him. So when he rolled in, I was a little bit starstruck, honestly, because it's like, whoa, here is David Achata. That training made such an impression on me, on the way I think about discipleship, being led by the questions, leaning into what you don't know, all of this stuff that's just so upside down that David's really good at articulating. So when I wound up with David's phone number, I had seen, it was so wild because he said, I'm here following Joe. Because when I see an older man who has something that I feel like I need, I ask, can I follow you around? So David kind of laid out the template that I just cited when I called him up and asked, can I come follow you around and ask you questions about your life? And then, we may get into it a bit, but how that went, again, it was one of those transformational inflection points in how I think about leading people when I went out to spend a week with David in Tennessee. But that's how it all started.
So you stalked him. I love it. Very good. I love what you referred to there about the substance of a person. I know, David, you had written, explain this 80-20% percentile about when I hear him saying it was a substance, I was attracted to your character. Would you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's probably a universal principle that 20% of your strategic focus gives you 80% of your impact. And that's, the business term, the Pareto principle. But in terms of the substance of a person, our world really loves to uplift the public persona. Any media that's out there is really about the 80%. It's like what this person has produced in the world gets idolized. But there was a lot of grinding, a lot of pain, a lot of life and story and experience that went into the development of the person that produced the work. And so, when it comes to this idea of what changes a person, it's not the absorption of the information that's out there. It's actually in time with people, real time at the table with their relationships, just to see how they do it. And I was talking with one of my coaching clients today, and they were sharing about the organization they're in. And the CEO said, I don't believe in all that touchy-feely stuff. And
Wait, did he actually use that phrase?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's normal.
Because I've had that asked me as well.
Yeah. And I mean, if I have more time with that person, I would ask them what they mean by that. But my client who works with this particular CEO said, well, we're really talking about culture, organizational culture, and culture is just code for relationships. So we're really talking about relationships. And so what changes people is relationship experience through time. One little hour conversations is not enough. It's time together. And that's one of the reasons why I try to get deep time with people, is because not only do I know that's what changes people, but it changes me. I mean, Blaine is so gracious to share a lot of those things, and I'm always flattered when he shares the things that he notices. But it's reciprocal, because I'm changed, by time with Blaine. My family was changed by time with Blaine. And it was in absorbing the substance of who he is as well that was a real blessing to us. And so I think that even from a, discipleship standpoint, unfortunately, most of the church in our society has missed the boat on this. It's a Sunday gathering. It's a study. But what would the church be without the 501c3, without the website? What would it be without a worship service? It would be, in the best possible sense, relationships experienced, by people who do deep time together. So anyway, so that's what it is Blaine and I have talked a lot about how when people want a mentoring relationship, they usually don't know what they're asking for. Oftentimes what they're saying is, will you notice me? Will you care for me? So maybe they don't really need a mentor, though a mentor can do some of those things. But underneath of it all, what great mentoring is will you do some deep time with me? And by doing so, it'll rub off. It's like C.S. Lewis says, if you want to get warm, you get near a fire. Just like if you want to get eternal life, you get near the one who has it. He says that in Mere Christianity, I think. That's what this is about. It's about getting near to the people who have what you want and allowing it to rub off.
I just think it's profound that lots of people don't. I love, Blaine, that you had the humility to go, oh my, there's something in him that I would really like to learn about. But it's equally impressive, David, that you were like, I intentionally make time. And I think that's a quality that in the church, we're too busy, and I hear you both going, this was priority. We were intentional about setting our schedules to create space for this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So tell us, Blaine, after that, following him around, what happened next? What were the next steps, or what were you wanting? Because it could have gone the other way, like, ooh, this is not what I thought. But he showed up to those places and you were like, okay, I'm left. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Obviously, it feels like you were left wanting more. What did you do after that period of following him around?
Well, let me say first that with men that I've mentored in the past, and I still do it, I ask them two things. What do you want out of this? And what do you need? Because it's different. And what do you want and what do you need? So, take it away, Blaine.
Yeah, those are great questions. David asked me those two questions. They're not at the same time when we were together. My first night in Tennessee, we're rolling down. You see the confidence, the professionalism of David. You would not understand how redneck he also is, how backwoods. And so we're rolling down the back roads of backwoods Tennessee. And he, puts a hand over and goes, Blaine, why have you come?
That's right. Why have you come?
Let the desire, let the answer to that question begin to surface. And then later we were on a hike in the woods and he asked, what are some of your main needs in the season that you're in? That's a question that I've come to love asking myself, asking other people. Some of these you got to file away because they're so valuable. And I was really nervous to go see David because I had never, also to find someone who had time is a rare thing. I expected David to invite me to blitz through his world. And I thought, I'm going to airdrop in. I want to see one of your small group gatherings. I want to follow you around through a weekend, and then I'm going to get out of your hair. And David said, to see my life, if you want to see my life, you probably have to come for about a week. I thought, no way. Also, my wife is never going to sign off on me going for a week. But I told her about it, and she was kind of so shocked by the invitation. We decided, let's do it. I mean, who does that? Again, you see, David has become the kind of person who is, to me, worth emulating. There's a story there. And what we mostly did in Tennessee was David mostly told me the story of you kind of have to go where you most don't want to go. What are you hoping won't come up in the path to becoming the kind of person you want to be? What in your story do you want to run away from? You're going to have to go there. And it's by going through that, taking the low road, that you will actually take on the nature that you are most interested in taking on. And I got to say, it's the texture of these things. It's the substance, where we weren't having these conversations by text message. We pulled up to a concrete pad in the middle of the forest, nothing around. The road was in really bad shape. David goes, guess what used to be here? I don't know, it looks like a concrete pad. And then he tells me the story of I would ride my bike down that hill to this convenience store. And he told me the story of having been taken away by a tornado. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a part of this story. His pastoring career was a part of this story, exchanging the false security that we can arrange for ourselves for the absolute insecurity of life with God, in which, in Bonhoeffer's phrase, we find the only true security. It's an amazing thing to read in Bonhoeffer. It's way better to be with, a man a decade older than you, living a life that I would not mind living, telling me about the moment when he realized that that was true and what it took to respond to that moment. They say, right, that you should never take advice from a person whose life you wouldn't want to live. Well, I got to get inside David's life and look around and say, you know what? If 10 years from now, my life looked more like this, that would be great. That's good with me. It might not look exactly the same in my context, but the priority of the life with his kids. I mean, he picked me up at the airport. He brought his daughter along. We all went to Walmart.
Did you get stuck in that produce section?
Actually,
I think we did.
Again,
maybe.
you don't go anywhere without David and not make a friend. So, but it was, I came back from that. And again, I didn't expect David to be relationally available, because who's relationally available? It's interesting that I think the development of our relationship has been a lot more of calling attention to something that is happening than me going to David and asking, will you be a mentor? And what I mean is, will you be my therapist and spiritual director and surrogate dad?
Yeah.
Right.
No, actually, what kind of began to just emerge relationally is we're friends, and our conversations are really interesting. And David has walked a difficult road and put in the time that I can ask him about some of the things that just come up when you are earnestly trying to build a healthy family culture, for example. And so being in Tennessee, when David had time for a phone call and kind of wanted to connect, I was pretty surprised. I was excited about it. And I think it was probably 6 months before I realized, oh, I think David and I are friends. And then the question for me became, because I'm very interested in having a good friendship with someone like David, I just often ask myself the question, what would a good friend do? And try to do that, because I'm not a great communicator. I'm very in process in so many levels. So even showing up in the way that's needed on the mentee side is a regular challenge. But just by, David has good relational skills, and try to copy what he does, or just ask, man, if I wanted a few years from now to have a great connection, an open connection with David, where he had some eyes on my life, actually, it's an enormous relief to have some older people really know what's going on and just be able to comment on your life. What would I do? And then try to do that thing, which has mostly looked like sending him book recommendations and taking occasional phone calls.
There's so many things I'm left with thinking.
Well,
Go ahead.
I can say, just from hearing you talk, Blaine, David has obviously never made you feel like a project, because you would not be speaking about him the way you are with the countenance on your face had he done that.
Oh, yeah. It's very clear that David's awesome. Like, I feel so much brotherly love for David. And I also know that David feels brotherly love for me.
Yes.
And so letting that kind of be the reality, it makes it much less transactional. But right, David? I mean,
Oh yeah. I mean, Blaine, you're crossing over into embarrassing me a little bit, telling all these great stories. What I've been wanting to interject the whole time is I just keep wanting to highlight the reciprocal nature of it. On Blaine's visit here some time ago, on his last day, I said to him, you're really interesting. This isn't like I'm not trying to use you for something. Like, you're genuinely an interesting person. You're worth it. You're worth the investment. And because I think said to me a couple of times, thanks for making the time. I know you're busy, type thing. And I'm like, no. I didn't make any time. you're interesting. This is actually how my life looks when I am at my best, clearing time for these types of relationships, and you're worth the investment, and you're an amazing person. So totally reciprocal.
I was just going to highlight, that reciprocal piece. And I think, we could do a series of podcasts on what if the church took these relationships, made the intentional time to be like Jesus. I believe that's what the 12 were going, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I just want to be more with you. And in my own life, when I didn't realize I was a mentee, Blaine, but an older woman, 12 years older, who at 46 hit rock bottom in her life. And she went to bed one night not knowing if God was real, crying out, God, if you're real, I need you to save me. And she had this radical transformation. She just, Jesus was all she had. And she'd lost her family, her adult children. She was just at rock bottom. I got the privilege of meeting her about 6 months later. And here I am, this young mom with little kids and frazzled. And she didn't need me to get cleaned up or bring my Bible. She entered my space. And from what she lost, gosh, it's going to make me, what she lost, she freely imparted to me. It was her mission. She lived missionally to give away. And last November, a few days ago, we celebrated her 1-year anniversary of being in heaven. She died suddenly. It was unexpected. And now that she's gone, I carry this sacred mission to what she so freely gave to me, that I'm intentional, David, for my friends who are younger to say what Blaine is saying, and one of them on the year anniversary of my friend's death sent me a card. She's a young woman, 10 years younger than I am. And she said, I never met Marty. Gosh, I didn't mean to go here, but I never met Marty. But I'm reaping the benefits of her so graciously sowing into your life because you're giving it away to me. And that's the gospel, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the Big C Church, we could grab a hold of. It's not a trendy thing. There's not these qualifications you require. It's being what you guys are so eloquently speaking about and giving what we have. And it's so precious and more sacred, maybe not more sacred. When it costs us something, it's not cheap grace, right? When it costs us something, it's even more valuable to give away. So I think you guys are illustrating that so profoundly.
What would you guys say to someone who says, I can't imagine being a mentor to someone else because I have my own problems and struggles? What would you say to that?
Blaine, you take it, man. Come on.
I just nose ghost you, man.
No. Man, I don't know. I mean, right off, maybe that's the problem.
What's the problem?
The problem I think a lot of people face is that they're too inside their own details. For me, one of the things that I try to get people to believe is that when we insert healthy practices into our lives, it crowds out the unhealth. Health begets more health. And so for people who say, I don't have time for it, Blaine and I have talked a bit about this idea of crafting a rule of life. And it's this idea of having on paper the practices that are going to sustain you in your life as a healthy person, as a healthy disciple, if you're a Christian. And everybody already has one. Everybody has a rule of life. It's just some people are reactive with it as opposed to proactive with how they want to live. And I would challenge people to say, okay, you don't have time for it. That's fine. Write down what you do make time for and what's important for you. And just look at it and see if that's okay. See if that's enough. And likely it won't be if all you can say is you have your own problems to deal with. But clearing time with somebody else is not just about output. It's like I used to think about my own, family life as an example of, I got to be a good leader in my family. I got to take time with my wife, my kids. And those things are true. But it wasn't until I had a mental breakdown 7 or 8 years ago now that I realized, oh, they have a lot to give me.
Mm.
Their presence in my life has a lot in it to bring me to health. And so for the conversation we're having here for mentoring, the person that you invite into your life has a lot to give you. I can say that in my time where I visited Blaine or he's visited me, I didn't leave there necessarily feeling exhausted. I left those experiences feeling quite filled up by watching how his presence blessed me and blessed my kids and blessed my wife through his listening. A lot of times I think that people are afraid that they're just going to have to stare at each other for a couple of days straight. And I'm a firm believer that if I wouldn't want to, like, if the experience I'm creating for someone does not feel like good news to me, then I'm not going to do it. I can't sustain something that is not like I am. And therefore you're going to attract people who are like that. And so that would be what I would say is, like, you got to get outside of yourself, craft a better rule of life. And by the way, there's a lot that you have to receive. It's not just about what you can give, it's about what you can receive.
Well said.
Several years ago, a young man I was mentoring, he looked really down this day, the time that we met. And he looked at me, he says, Chris, thank you for mentoring me. He goes, I know I've got a lot of problems. And I knew the Lord told me to quickly tell him, I don't mentor you because you have problems, because I do too. Mm-hmm. I mentor you because you have great value. And it's worth it to me, the time we spend together. I receive from you as well. So that's a mindset sometimes. I have problems. Okay, we all do to a certain level. So therefore I need a mentor. It's so much more than that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That's so good. I'm really glad you two are jumping in with the stories you are too, because they're so beautiful. In particular, I'm so glad it came up your mentor who passed away a year ago. That's just an amazing legacy. It's interesting. Well, I just double down on a couple things that David said. On our very first phone call, David did say that busy is the new stupid. And we do have to say, unhurrying is non-negotiable. It's honestly, so whether you're looking for a mentor, honestly, or whatever the relationship is, if you want higher quality relationships, we just gotta say, and people already know this, so hopefully we're already trying to do it, but it's not easy. Our boy John Ortberg asked the phenomenologist Dallas Willard, what do I have to do to be closer to God? And Dallas Willard famously responded, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. John Ortberg writes it down. Okay, what else? Dallas Willard, that's kind of it. And then as John Ortberg narrated the fruit of doing that in his life with God, his relational world, creating healthy patterns, it really did begin to change everything. So I would say, full stop. If you, like me, are interested in developing a healthier relational world, you have to unhurry. There's kind of a joke that, I was going to visit David, and then just last week, then I read his book, and it was the prompt I needed to cancel a trip and go with my family to a cabin instead. And my kids threw up the whole time, and it was freezing cold and snowy, and it still felt restful. And I told my wife, I'm not pacing well when you feel like it's more restful to be throwing up for 2 days in a cabin with the kids. This is one of those, even a person like me can see the problem. So I'll say it's a moving target, at least for me, to pace down to the rate where I'm relationally in a healthy place and therefore available to healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. And at the risk, I know I'm kind of soapboxing here, but I would say the great thing with David is just changing what it is that we think we impart. David is kind of like a Pez dispenser of wise sayings. Like, there's a lot that comes out, but it honestly does not stick as much as narrating failure and what the experience of submitting to the process of transformation did for him. I think the best image for this comes from, there's a scholar, theologian, his book is A Grace Disguised, Jerry Sitzer. And he said that the problem for so many Christians in a difficult season is that the sun is going down and they're chasing the setting sun, what you have to do is turn around and run into the darkness. When it comes to what it is that we think we're going to impart, isn't it Brene Brown? No, wrong one. It's Ruth Haley Barton. The greatest gift we bring to the world is a transformed self. And so unhurry, and then let the weakness actually lead to a certain extent what you are imparting. It just makes the person who goes, man, my life is a real mess right now, such a fertile ground to be able to impart so much of the character of God. So it seems like a good sign.
Do you see why I'd want to have Blaine come over to my house? Come on.
Man, I want you both to come to our house.
Well, and I mean,
Okay.
I want to just keep going for a moment with what Blaine said about the quality of really great relationship like this, because Blaine has a book coming out. He's an aspiring writer, and I hope it'll do well. But because of that, he's had a really crazy schedule. He was supposed to come out here for something and then come over here to see me. And he texted me last minute and said, hey, I was reading what you wrote. I'm in more in the business world, and the new book I put out is called Executive Retreats for Busy Business Leaders. So you can tell it's really focused on a narrow group type of person. But Blaine was reading it for me to write a review. And the last chapter in the book is called Go Away with Your Family. It's about 4 disciplines to be able to sustain health. And it applies to everybody. What I've been telling Blaine and what I tell people in the corporate world is the higher you go in any organization, the more emotional weight you carry. And if you are not steady as a person, you'll break. And it's the same with fame, money, power. The more of any of those 3 things that you have, the more emotional weight you'll carry. And so Blaine at this point in his life is starting to feel the weight of some of those things. And I was so sad that he couldn't come, but I was very honored and very happy that he would say, it's because of what I read in your book, I decided not to come, because I realized the pace I was living at was not healthy, and it'd be better for me to cancel these things and go away with my family. And I can't quote the exact text messages, but we exchanged a number of text messages just about the importance of what he was up to, and how those are the things that help you create a life to where when your kids are grown up, they'll still want to be with you. So from that perspective, the relationship is doing its work. Such an honor to have somebody cancel coming to see me because they read what I wrote in one of my books. So I was honored by that, Blaine. I wish you could have been here, but I'm glad you took time to go watch your kids throw up.
What were you going to say earlier?
No, any closing thoughts? Let's have Blaine tell us briefly about your book.
Oh, thank you. I wish that David had read it already, because he's so good at explaining things in a short way. I am less good at that. My book is an epic introduction to the story of God in the Bible, told by an extreme history nerd. And
are you the nerd?
Yes.
Okay.
And what's
the name of the
Fortunately and unfortunately. So, for example, the greatest probably conqueror of all time is the last king of Anshan. He was this backwoods king who shows up in the Bible under another name. And he's actually in the Bible called Cyrus. But after he died, there was a difficulty in the ascension of the Persian kingdom, and in this complex story recorded by this historian named Herodotus, they learned that this functional wizard had almost succeeded in staging a coup. His name was Bardia. And Bardia was a magus, the plural of which is magi. And the tradition of the Magi originated about 100 years before the Persian Empire, but rolls right into the New Testament account when a group of Magi show up looking for the Messiah. So when I just learned several years ago that when I read old things and the story of God in the Old Testament in particular, it's a very different experience as just a nerd. to someone who's maybe less familiar with the way ancient literature works.
Mm.
And so it was my attempt to take what is unfamiliar in the ancient world of the Bible and make it appreciable to my wife and to people in my church, principally because the whole Bible serves to set up its singular revelation, which is Jesus as God incarnate. So it actually, you guys, it came out this morning. And
Oh, we did. Okay. We say this morning, this is being recorded and it'll be posted later, but
I know,
today
but
is,
for you and I, it did. So
right,
it's out
today is
now.
November
Whenever
1st,
this airs, it came
2023.
out. It's called The Paradise King, The Tragic History and Spectacular Future of Everything According to Jesus of Nazareth.
Love
Sounds
it.
pretty epic.
Yeah.
What else before we close?
David, do you want to reference your books as well and how people can find out about ordering them and get in touch with you all?
I have 3 books. One is a book I wrote on grief, and that was my first one. And it's called In the Caverns, and really sort of spawned my writing in a muscle. I've written a few business books this last year because I wanted to get some things out of my mind and onto the page of things I talk about a lot. So one of my business books, the first one was called Embrace What You Don't Know. And it's really the story of me stumbling into the corporate world and the stories of how I've found stability in my life, leadership, and how you create stability in organizations. And it's part 1, and there's a part 2 to it called Executive Retreats for Busy Business Leaders. And that's really about the disciplines to create a stable leader. And those are all, I think, anywhere. So Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or wherever. Working on some other things. I want to get back to some faith-based writing, but I did want to do the business books to get them out there. And you can find them on any of those book websites, or if you want to connect with me, you can find me on my website, which is achatacoaching.com. And my focus is not primarily on mentoring, though I do have mentoring relationships like with Blaine. My focus is leadership development. But I do a portion of my business where I take executive leaders away on retreats, for short retreats, because they're busy people. So 1 to 2 days. And we go away and we work on things like values and figure out, like, what is the quality of your voice? How does it manifest in your organization? You live a hard life, so how can you sustain it like you uniquely can sustain it, as opposed to doing something somebody else told you should be doing, which will exhaust you and burn you out. So that's how you can find the books and some of my work. I would love to connect with anybody if they want to talk more about the content in this podcast or even leadership development work.
While you guys were talking, I tried to make mental notes and then I got lost. So I wrote down a few key words that I felt you guys illustrated so well, the value of taking time for one another. I mean, time is so costly, and yet it seems like you guys create that to give that to one another. The intentionality of how you're both being intentional with one another. I love how you both address the power of story and not shying away from the hard bits and the scary bits. And I'm so over my story. I lead with all the gruesome things. I want people to know God's so good. You know, like, you see this exterior, but let me tell you the hardest parts, because it just highlights his goodness. And I just think we could do a whole other podcast on, we want to debunk the myth that mentoring mentee, it's this whatever relationship. You guys are friends at the end of the day. That's this beautiful relationship. And I love how you highlighted that. And I just think that is a great period at the end of an incredible story. And we're so grateful you guys freely spoke. I love how you speak about one another. So yeah.
Thank you.
We really appreciate the time with you guys, and so thankful for the connection that we get to do this today. So anything else?
That's it. Thank you guys. So
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so fun. I'm also so grateful for the 2 of you, and that you do the mentoring you do. We pray so often in our church that Jesus would bring in multi-generational leadership, because there are, frankly, not that many people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s who want to get around younger people to talk about being transformed. So I'm so glad that you do what you do. And thank you for letting us come on and talk about our friendship.
We love it.
Yeah.
Do you want to close this out?
Yeah. Well, as always, thank you guys for listening. We will give all the information in the program notes. So David and Blaine, officially, thank you so much for tuning in. We want to thank you as always for listening. If today was helpful, if something that you listened to was helpful, we would really love it if you would go to Apple or Spotify, leave us a review, download, subscribe, and for all things related to podcast, if you'd like to give a financial contribution to help us continuing bringing this sort of broadcasting to you, just go to FahrenheitMentoring.org.